Facebook overhauling its messaging services, the social media giant to integrate WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook Messenger so its underlying tech infrastructure is banded together. That's according to a report in the New York Times. Guest host for the hour, Ed Lee. He is a New York Times media reporter and a CNBC contributor. Ed, how do we think about this? I mean, are they kind of hiving off kind of legacy Facebook and saying this is everything else? Is there a business purpose, or is it part of the whole privacy issue?
It's a great question. I think it's really complicated in terms of just the mechanics of what this is. So to start, to be clear, it's really a merging of the back end, the technology infrastructure. The front end is going to look the same to you. If you're a WhatsApp user, it's still going to look the same. You can still contact your people the same way. The key difference, though, and this is where it ultimately starts to bleed into each other, is that there's a chance the way that they're designing it is that as a WhatsApp user, I could message you on Facebook if you don't even have WhatsApp, or even Instagram. So I think that's where the liability is, but also the opportunity. I think it's a move really against Apple, right? So Apple's biggest moat, so to speak, it's sort of social media sort of thing that they haven't really tapped into is iMessage, right? Everyone who has an iPhone, you have iMessage. It circuits around every other sort of system that's out there, including the phone system, any social media. Social media is largely messaging anyway, so it's a way for Facebook to sort of own that side of it instead of these three different fractured groups. So I think that's the motivation, the business motivation behind it. In terms of how it affects consumers, how it affects everyday use, I think that's going to be a liability. My 14-year-old, she's a big Instagram user. She doesn't like that. She knows it's owned by Facebook. She doesn't like that fact, but at the same time, you know, it was always sort of a separate thing. Now it's less of a separate thing.
I feel like 2 years ago, this would have been looked upon by investors as a positive thing, right. But now it's going to be a risk. I mean, if congressional leaders were ever looking at Facebook to sort of crack down on their reign over data and consumer data, this is going to be the time if you say, you know what, we're going to consolidate all these operations. And by the way, WhatsApp users, now you might have to give some more information about your own personal data in order to have an account. Whereas right now, it's minimal data. And
right
so for many users, they like that.
They like that, but also, I mean, so Mark Zuckerberg had a big op-ed in the Journal last week where he's effectively defending what Facebook already does, that he claims that, you know what, there's a lot of transparency and openness and that users have control over their data. From what we've seen from reporting from my colleagues and elsewhere, it's not entirely the case. There's a lot of data that leaks out, that's shared unintentionally even, that even you weren't aware of, and sometimes in some cases that Facebook wasn't aware of. So that is the bigger issue. I don't think users think that, like, oh, you're trying to do something. It's just that you haven't contained the beast that the way you ought to be doing. And I think that is the bigger issue. He hadn't addressed that in the op-ed.
And the op-ed begins with the fundamental tension between Zuckerberg's view of what Facebook does and what users want, which is more relevant ads. He kept leading with that. And the idea, everyone else says, well, I'm not really sure if the cost of relevant ads is worth it.
Well, and so it's interesting. When I actually shut off targeting on my Facebook just some months ago, just to see how it works. And every single time I'm doing it, there is this thing: you will get less relevant ads. You know, I think the point they're making is you're still going to see ads. Some people, I think, mistake that.
So you might as well get good ads.
Yeah, they're like, if you're going to get ads, might as well get something that's relevant to you. Right. I'm all for that. I think at this stage of the game, most people are for something that's relevant to them. That that actually matches what I'm looking for. But that's less of the issue than, well, you have all my data. It leaks out in these other ways that could be really bad. I don't know. It could be bad for democracy. You know, from how a lot of the analysts are showing us. So I think that's the lack of information, the lack of understanding of how that works is a bigger issue. Again, and then going back to the point about the three different messaging apps, I mean, there was a strict division between them because there are strict identities, right? And so, you know, put it in sort of terms in the current political climate, it's like crossing borders, right?
And there aren't defenders anymore because all the founders have left. I mean, the writing was sort of on the wall when it comes to this consolidation because everybody who's associated with these original platforms that were acquired
WhatsApp founder left, the Instagram founders left, and I think that was a big part of, you know, when you're building something, there's an identity to it. It's not just a piece of technology. And a lot of users, you know, social media in particular, that is how they identify themselves, right? And so all of a sudden, if there's less difference between one and the other, I think that becomes a big issue.
But to Melissa's point, a year ago or a year and a half ago, the idea that you would be able to make these messaging apps kind of fungible and therefore monetize them
And
more
collect
easily would have
the
been considered
data
very,
and
very
leverage
bullish.
the
Right.
data.
I think leveraging data is a big aspect to it, but I do think the fundamental motivation is to really sort of take on Apple. That was the thing that was made less clear in a lot of the analysis post what this is, because Mark Zuckerberg still sees Apple as a huge threat in this way.
But they want to go against Apple, and they're going against Apple and what they say about privacy, because Apple has been stalwart when it comes to protecting consumer
we protect your
So
data.
if they
We're
want to
not-
go head-to-head with Apple, I don't know. That's a real gloves-off kind of match.
Well, two of the biggest companies, two of the most innovative companies in Silicon Valley going at it. I think that'll be a big thing. I think the other thing to point out from the op-ed is that Zuckerberg would really want to make it clear, look, regulation I know is coming. We should codify existing behavior, not create new ones, or not create barriers for different types of behavior. And I think that's the other key takeaway, is that he's basically saying to Congress, not just to Congress, but also to the EU, I know there's all this discussion. I know there are new systems in place. This is how we do things now. We do it well. Let's codify that. He's basically don't change how we're currently operating.
In other words, we figured it out.
We figured it out. We're regulating
stamp it.
ourselves,
Yeah.
right? So don't mess with that, please. And I think that's whether that message lands, whether that finds purchase ultimately. I think Congress is going to be in a bind for a while
Yeah.
before they even get to it. So he'll probably come back to that messaging at some point.